Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar series on restoring soil health with fungi and permaculture principles. This particular webinar is about applying permaculture and agroecological principles. We're so happy to have you here. If you, while we're waiting for people to join, if you could write in the chat where you are located in the world, we'd love to know. Rainy Central Texas. I'm up in the Dallas area. Got Tennessee, we got Vancouver, Jackson, Mississippi, Australia. Wow. Panama. We're everywhere. Slovenia, Austin, Texas. Lots of Canadians. Louisiana. Oh, Kiwi transplant. That's great. Switzerland. We are truly international here. This is great. All right. Let's go ahead and move on a little bit. You guys can please continue putting where you're from in the chat. Let's just talk a little bit about the webinar series here. We're on webinar 2 of our series. We'll be looking at some case studies that have a very common thread of soil health. Next week, we'll have another webinar with some of our other soil heroes, with Nicole Masters, Todd Harrington, Brian Vack, and Dr. Elaine herself. And then stay tuned for what we're doing with webinar 4. We're working on something special. Before we get started, let's talk about a few instructions. You will be muted just to make sure everybody can hear properly. If you have a question for the panelists, please enter it in the Q&A section. And to note that you have 2 sections. You've got a Q&A section and you've got a chat section. So chit chat with your fellow attendees in the chat section, but put your questions for the panelists in the Q&A section. All right. We're going to go ahead and get started because we've got a lot to cover. We're going to spend a little time with introductions, and then we're going to move on to the presentations. I won't spend too long on this because we're just going to go right into the presentations. So I'm going to ask the presenters to introduce themselves because I think that seems like it makes the most sense. So, John, would you please give an introduction of who you are and tell us how it is that you're in Kansas right now?
Well, thank you. I'm John Liu. I'm a filmmaker and ecologist. I think I've been on a number of the Soil Food Web School programs before, so maybe some of the people know me already. And I'm here because my mother turned 105, and I came for her birthday. I'm in Tecumseh, Kansas.
That's awesome. Cory.
Cory Miller. Yeah, thank you, Kim. Happy to be on. I think this is the second or third time I've been able to join the Soil Food Web School, and just happy to be able to give back and kind of tell the story of where this course has taken me and where we're at now. So based in Missoula, Montana, and currently farming about 3,000 acres.
Awesome. Delvin.
Greetings, everyone, from a little village on the coast of British Columbia, Canada. I'm a permaculture student and teacher. I've studied extensively with Bill Mollison and David Holmgren in Australia and taken a lot of courses and taught a lot of courses all over the world. And it's been a great joy to develop a permaculture design certification course with the Soil Food Web School as part of the legacy of Graham Bell. We're just wrapping that up now. It's going to be released soon. We have 77 teachers from 22 countries with a majority women. So really exploring inclusivity and diversity. And yeah, I'm excited to share a little bit about permaculture principles and community garden in my little village today.
Thank you, Delvin. I'm very excited to have you three here. This is my first time hosting one of the webinars for the school. I'm very excited to do that. I am the Chief Operating Officer of the school, but I got here the long way. I was actually a consultant training student, and before that, I was a organic farmer. So it was a slippery slope, of course, once I got involved with learning about what Dr. Elaine teaches. I joined the school, and I've now been with the school for 4 years. So it is my pleasure to be here to host you three guys, and let's get started with Delvin's presentation. I'm going to turn it over to you, Delvin.
Brilliant. Well, I'm so glad to be here. I'm representing the Permaculture Institute in the USA and the Permaculture Association in the UK. And as I say, just joy to be collaborating with the Soil Food Web School in this incredible global learning community. Let's see. There we go. Yeah. Excited about this upcoming course with the Soil Food Web School. We're hoping to launch sometime in the not too distant future. So stay tuned. This is a little bit of a preview and a taster of some of the permaculture that we're going to be exploring in a number of courses that will all puzzle together into a permaculture design certification. Design is all about context. A core permaculture principle from David Holmgren, the co-originator of permaculture, is design from patterns to details. So I thought I'd start by describing permaculture and permaculture principles before giving some examples of how I applied them. So you might benefit from considering how permaculture and its principles could apply to you, to your own gardens or your farms, or even your life. I suggest getting out a piece of paper, if you haven't already, that you can doodle on or take notes on, or open a document on your computer. And instead of taking notes on what I'm saying, consider noting how permaculture principles might be applied to bring benefit to you and your land or your life. And if you want to activate this global classroom, you may want to write down insightful notes or quotes in the chat. This is all a way for us to practice the permaculture principle, capture and store energy. Ralph Waldo Emerson noted, "Nature is loved by what is best in us." And permaculture design recognizes that people are obviously part of nature, and thus our primary ecological service, like everything else on Earth, is to help fulfill the core functions of nature. My beloved permaculture mentor, Rosemary Morrow, who is a teacher on the upcoming Soil Food Web School permaculture course, shares some of the core functions of nature as cleaning the air, cleaning the water, holding water on land, and creating flushes of growth by supporting healthy soil in the soil food web. Nature carries out the functions that makes all life possible, creating the conditions for life to thrive in. And that is our role too. So what is permaculture anyway? David Holmgren, who's also a teacher on our upcoming course, says, popularly seen as a cool form of organic gardening, permaculture could be better described as a design system for resilient living and land use based on universal ethics and ecological design principles. Although the primary focus of permaculture has been on the redesign of gardening, farming, animal husbandry, and forestry, the same ethics and principles apply to the design of buildings, tools, and technology. Applying permaculture ethics and principles in our gardens and homes inevitably leads us towards redesigning our ways of living so as to be more in tune with the local surpluses and limits. Other people describe permaculture as an ethical design science, which cares for the earth, for people, and for our collective future. But permaculture might best be described simply as basic common sense. Permaculture is the culmination of countless millennia of humanity learning and growing with nature. Elder teacher Jude Hobbs, also from our upcoming Soil Food Web School course, calls permaculture our birthright knowledge because it's been passed down from wisdom keepers, earth stewards, and traditional peoples of the land from all cultures on earth. So I wanted to acknowledge all the indigenous people and traditional cultures who created much of the foundational wisdom from which permaculture continues to grow, including its principles. Recognized with the Right Livelihood Award for providing practical and exemplary solutions to the most urgent challenges facing the world today, the co-originator of permaculture, Bill Mollison, wrote, "In life and design, we must accept that immutable rules will not apply, and instead be prepared to be guided on our own continuing exploration by flexible principles and directives." So how is it that our world has survived and thrived through so many ages of time? How is it that nature is able to produce tool-using people capable of contemplating nature's design together today? What are the secrets of nature's success? I like to think of nature as an operating system, a very complex, living, and evolving operating system we could call OS Gaia. Like all operating systems, it's supported by a series of design principles which guide the natural process of its development. In practical terms, these principles could be thought of as top tips or best practices from nature. And these principles are expressed through people who are also a unique and integral part of nature. So how can permaculture principles help? Well, one of the permaculture elders in Crystal Waters, Australia, Robin Clayfield, also a teacher on our upcoming course, said to me about 20 years ago in an interview, "Permaculture principles help us design people systems and decision-making methods, as well as gardens, inviting us to connect better and be more sensible in our designs." Author of Gaia's Garden, Toby Hemingway, described permaculture principles as indicators of sustainability. The more principles you have at work in your system, the more likely it is to be functioning in a way that is caring for people, caring for the planet, and our collective future. So Toby saw permaculture as part of many global movements that are creating tipping points for positive change. So I'm going to share some examples of permaculture principles in action from a community gardening project that I designed and maintained in my tiny village as an accessible and small-scale example of how they can inform decisions and designs. So for about 14 years, I transformed the downtown core of my tiny village into a permaculture demonstration site using permaculture principles. The Heart Gardens, I call it, is on a property. It's about 1.2 acres, a half a block from the ocean on the west coast of British Columbia. We have snowy winters and hot summers, including drought and water restrictions. The Heart Garden site features 37 different small gardens and areas, including about 300 species of hardy, drought-tolerant, perennial food and medicine plants. A core permaculture principle from David Holmgren is use and value diversity. Part of nature's strength comes from diversity. Having many different species, elements, energies, and resources creates resilience by providing a wide variety of functions, products, services, habitats, harvests, and opportunities. A byproduct of diversity in edible garden plants is fulfilling the permaculture principle, dispersed yield, spreading harvests out across the year to spread out the benefits and the harvesting times. Bill Mollison noted the permaculture principle, advance succession, something people are in a unique position to do in the ecosystem. By using small trees, shrubs, and other perennials, I created stable microclimates that serve to fulfill the permaculture principle, buffer climate, creating more moderate temperatures, protecting from wind and climatic factors, adding organic matter and nutrients to the soil, helping the soil retain water in the ground, just to provide habitat for flourishing soil food web communities. I also really focused on nitrogen-fixing plants and shrubs like lupin and soapberry, along with bioaccumulators like yellow dock and burdock to bring minerals up to the topsoil while aerating it in cooperation with worms and all these other soil creatures. The focus of the Heart Gardens is a collection of over 200 species of native plants with a history of use by the coastal First Peoples, which I collected from small family-run nonprofit nurseries all over southern British Columbia. I wanted to practice the social permaculture principle of decolonize. Gardens are often include, exotic plants, which are not familiar food sources for native wildlife, including birds and insects, pollinators and predators. Native plants can be more disease and drought resistant, create food and habitat for beneficial native wildlife, including soil communities that have formed a long-standing symbiotic relationship. So featuring these plants in the gardens also celebrates the cultures of the land and the traditional indigenous Sechelt Nation and Coast Salish peoples who still reside on and steward this bioregion. I saved seeds for gifting and welcome people to divide plants or take cuttings to proliferate these plants where they live. Permaculture focuses on radical relocalization. And like nature, it is guided by the permaculture principle, use on-site resources. So my compost system was inspired by the quick return system from May Bruce, a key historic figure in the UK Soil Association. It's got 3 bins. It's not turned, so it takes a little bit longer, but requires less upkeep and certainly provides some really incredible soil. Surrounding the compost are bioaccumulators favored by the biodynamic movement, like stinging nettle, yarrow, comfrey, valerian, dandelion, and these support life processes by contributing a wide variety of minerals. Next to the compost is a raised vermiculture system, a sink, hosting a worm colony that processes weeds with weed seeds, including fast-spreading yet beneficial plants like horsetail, which we have a lot here. So I custom brew small batches of bioaccumulator infused worm juice to serve the needs of the soil and thus the plants that grow from it. Surrounding the compost, there's rotating hugelkultur beds where wood, brambles, and other woody material from the gardens that don't work so well in the compost are decomposed as sort of living compost gardens, hosting sunchokes and other spike root plants that benefit from the garden's ability to hold water in its organic matter and generate internal heat year-round while decomposing. In order to help fulfill the permaculture principle of water identified by Jeff Lawton of slow, spread, sink, and store, beyond all sorts of water catchment, I applied some permaculture strategies and techniques to protect and feed the soil. So I used different mixes of chopped up bioaccumulators like the comfrey and the stinging nettle and the yarrow, along with a diverse variety of seaweed from the beach, which luckily is only half a block away, and lots of leaves from the huge big leaf maple that the property was designed around. And that maple tree also produced a huge amount of Loberia pulmonaria, a form of lungwort. It's an epiphytic symbiote, which includes a fungus, an algae, and cyanobacterium, which is nitrogen fixing. So I just ran the mower over it and used the result as a top dress slow release fertilizer. And then before the winter, I top dressed the mulch with finished compost to protect it from wind erosion. So I was effectively practicing a form of subsurface mulching. I also use extensive green mulches and ground covers, including redwood sorrel, which I love, wild strawberries, red clover, ajuga. And this has worked really wonderfully in creating habitat for the soil and beneficial organisms, slowing the movement of water through the ground, spreading it out through the soil, sinking it into the ground, and storing it for longer by preventing surface evaporation. As Larry Santoyo, another teacher on my course and one of my primary mentors, noted in his permaculture principle, create conditions, no one can really grow plants or animals. I mean, nature grows by itself, but we can help create the conditions for things to grow in. And this is a core focus of permaculture. So putting up bat houses, insect hotels, and housing for native bees, I also established bramble fedges or food hedges of things like native roses and berries. And then the birds and insects, I created habitats, sort of returned the favor by increasing soil fertility with their droppings and reducing what Dr. Adam Cobb taught me to call potentially problematic organisms, what I previously called pests. So thank you, Adam. I love that. Finally, I wanted to highlight the permaculture principle, integrate rather than segregate, which looks to enhance the relationships between elements, since the connections between elements can bring more ecological benefit than the individual elements themselves in many cases. So I worked in conjunction with the community association, the official community planning committee, regional district government, and local ecologically minded nonprofit organizations in my process of inviting public participation in the gardens, as well as expanding them onto district land beyond the property's edges. I also integrated the community with signage, with maps for self-guided tours, and a community garden, encouraging locals to experiment with permaculture gardening strategies as a demonstration to the larger community and its visitors of ecological gardening methods. This was supported by an eco-education center full of free resources, including a seed bank with free seeds in collaboration with the Sunshine Coast Seed Saving Collective. And the site also hosted an all-organic farmers market every week to support the local community. So if you want to explore permaculture principles more, my wife Grace and I produce a permaculture design deck, which shares many of the permaculture principles. It's a free download. It's also available in printed form through our website, permaculturedesign.earth. In closing, I really want to encourage you all to apply permaculture principles to decisions and designs for your land, including care of its soil. Consider how you can help fulfill the core functions of nature: to clean the air, to clean water, to hold water on the land, to create flushes of growth, and to create the conditions for life. So I thought I'd end with a quote from Mary Reynolds, a renowned rewilder and garden designer, as well as teacher on our upcoming Soil Food Web School Permaculture Design Certificate course. She says, "Our gardens are gifts to us. They can also become our teachers. As guardians of these little patches of the planet, we can learn to work hand in hand with the land to restore each other's health. Every fragment of soil, plant, or tree that becomes recognized, respected, and loved has a healing effect on the entire planet. Nature teaches us about the unity of things. We can create dynamic, balanced, and integrated ecosystems that will offer to sustain and nourish us along with all the other creatures that share the land with us. We need a green-fingered revolution to bring nature back into the garden, and this begins with encouraging people to respect and love the land they live on. Gardens belong to nature, not the other way around, and so do we." Thank you.
Beautiful, Delvin. Thank you. What's so great about permaculture is that it has no scale. This applies to any scale situation, and Delvin just gave us a little bit of a smaller scale example, but permaculture can be practiced on any scale. And we're going to continue to scale up with our next presenter, Cory Miller, talking about what he's doing at Grass Valley Farms.
Thank you very much, Kim. Delvin, that was amazing. Thank you for your insight. I love sitting in these because I think I learn more than I'm able to share. So I appreciate that. Want to give you guys a little tour of our farm and kind of some updated studying and things that we have discovered. Moving on for some context, we're based in Missoula, Montana. Kind of highlighted the land that we manage specifically in this photo. We're near low rainfall, 15 inches annual precip, and that's on a really good year. Last year, I think we were down around 9. We graze cattle. We grow hay for production. We grow sod for production. Of course, sell meat and do some pheasant hunting in the winter. One thing that's interesting about this process is when we started, and if you've seen something that I've done before, focus was on how do we move away from fertilizer? How do we turn this farm into something that's more regenerative, something that gives back to not only us, but that we are able to add value to the land rather than take. And so kind of highlight some of the production that we've achieved and then kind of explain how we've gotten here. So as you can see, I listed out some hay production on certain fields, and in general, 50 to 60% better than we were doing when we started in 21. One thing I'm most excited about is what we're doing with bird populations. We currently raise, actually just this week, took delivery of another 1,500 pheasant chicks that we're raising for a hunting operation we have. And, you know, a lot of people, you know, depending on how you feel about hunting, for us, it's a way for us to keep land in production and not have to harvest. So areas that we were constantly cutting for hay or at least, you know, farming that land, it's allowed us to keep it as open space, increase diversity, but gives good pheasant habitat for our birds. And so it was a way for us to monetize that piece of land that we couldn't before. Our beef side, last year we finished 30 animals. This year we're approaching 60, which is kind of a big deal for us. We're now feeding the neighborhood next to us, and it's exciting when you're able to drive down the road or go visit a neighbor and drop off beef that's theirs to sustain their family for the year. It took a while for us to get to that level, but now it's a primary part of our business, and we're making good use of our land in doing so, and making some really good quality beef, especially on grass. Herds continuing to grow. We added another 60 animals this year. Our sod field, and I've talked about this before, where sometimes we have to have a business that sustains the rest of our objectives. And sod for us is that business. Out of the total 700 acres of our main owned ranch land, we have one pivot that we use for sod. The money that's generated on our sod production to feed the subdivisions around us sustains the entire ranch and allows us to continue the work that we're doing. Last year, we harvested and installed 650,000 square feet of sod. Doesn't seem like a lot, but we were lucky to get it placed in some pretty prime locations. One of our main parks in downtown Missoula, where our farmers markets are held, where concerts are held, Karis Park, we were able to do a restoration with them with our sod, and really exciting project, especially to be able to put our sign there with all the people in town. It really helped out the sod side of our business. So how did we get here? How did we start improving the soil? So of course, in 21, I took Elaine's Soil Food Web School courses and began making and applying dry compost. First year, 3,500 yards, 2022, 4,000, 23, another 4,000. And then this year down to 3,000. And you'll see that we're starting to taper and really focus on the areas. And what you'll find as you go through this process is that less and less is necessary as you start to increase your organic matter and you start to have food available for our biology, and you're not taking everything from your land. The land really does start to produce on its own, and no longer are you having to be the crutch to improve that. 2022, 45,000 gallons of extract. Last year, 32,000. And this year we've applied to all of our new seedings. And then of course, we used extract to clean up some old bale grazed areas, some high fungal, to help us break down a lot of that lignin. It's changed the dynamic of what our land is able to produce. And, you know, people ask me, well, what does 3,000 yards of compost look like? It's a lot. This right here is about 250 yards, and makes a decent, or sorry, this is about 500 yards, makes a decent pile for me to walk on. But you can see the grass around it growing, and I want to highlight that because this field is now planted in wheat, and further in the presentation, I'm going to show you the differences of what we've been able to do with compost. This is a slide, kind of one of the favorite ones that I took right away. And these are the things that you cannot see from your field really just looking through, I mean, when you look into the side profile of a field, it's hard to see the depth, it's hard to see the density of plants. And got lucky to have a drone to fly over. And this picture shows the exact lines that we drove the compost truck through the field the first year. And you can see when we hit this road, we caused that truck to bounce and to shoot extra compost out the back end. And you can see where we have this big flush of growth everywhere we hit that bump or hit a bump in the field. And you couldn't see that just walking through the field. But when you saw it from above, you know, it proved this point. Hey, Cory, what you're doing is the right thing. The other thing I did is I did some testing, and I think testing is important to understand the context of what your goal is. And I've highlighted some of the stuff from a 2022 or 21-22 tests that we did. These fungal to bacteria ratio 0.19 to 1, as you learn in the class and as you learn in studying agriculture, quite low. Or pH 7.8, that's not abnormal. But what's exciting is we went through this process, things started to change. And I kind of want to highlight some of those results because it's often hard to see from year to year unless you're a really good documenter. And of course, I'm a busybody. So I want to be out in the field making hay, doing these projects, and I forget to take the pictures. I forget to write the notes. And so testing to me is important because it gives me, you know, context on where our goals are and where we're headed. The other thing that I do is I look at our soil every other day on a microscope, not always the same place, just somewhere on the ranch as I'm driving by, take a sample and come back. And I keep those samples and take photos of them because I want to see what change is happening. And, you know, one of the things that I got out of the Soil Food Web School was specifically that, you know, observe, watch these changes happen. So back to the testing. One thing, this is a PLFA test for anyone that does a phospholipid fatty acid. And this tells you essentially as a way to show you the makeup of your microbiology on your soil. And when I saw this the first time, I was petrified because I had no protozoa. And I said, well, everything I learned in school showed me that they were an integral part of it. And, you know, I was scared. I said, well, my soil is not going to function without it. Well, what I found out is this test is actually not really indicative of the protozoa that you have. And so really focused on microscopes and taking samples. And as I was looking in my soil, I was finding testate amoeba with the potential for major reproduction happening. And so it told me that my soil really wasn't as bad as the standard scientific test showed. We also had nematodes. We had lots of bacteria. We had a little bit of everything in our soil, and lots and lots and lots of earthworms. And for me, that's kind of a game changer, saying, you know, look, Cory, you have this stuff, you're doing the right thing, let's continue. And so we really started to analyze the soil specifically. I told you earlier about that big compost pile. This is a picture that I took just yesterday because I wanted to highlight what the differences are of compost and non-compost. So this is a side profile taken through a wheat crop that was planted, I think, right at 3.5 weeks ago. On the left-hand side profile, right-hand side, this is a vertical top-down. You can see, you know, potentially some weedy species in there. And this is no compost underneath. Okay, the next picture or set of pictures is taken just next to it. And this is a side profile where we're in compost. And of course, a top profile. And you can see that these plants have much more tillering happening, which more tillering meaning I'm putting out more solar panels, I'm collecting more energy, feeding the soil. And so this is them side by side. And it really gives a comparison of how different these two areas are. And these are, I think, in the field or maybe less than 10 feet apart. So soils in general are the same. It's just the food source that's available. The other thing that I found, and you can see very chunky compost, which we like to make, ladybugs. And this next picture is really exciting for me because that's how many ladybugs can you find? Where's Waldo in Cory's wheat field? I've counted them. Of course, there's 6 of them just in this one photo. And you know, when you have predators, you have a food source. And so they're helping you eliminate potential problems coming in the future. These are some of my classic favorite photos of different things that we've done on the ranch. This photo on the left, of course, is a daikon radish and a turnip. And this particular food source fed the 50-acre field, fed 30 of my cows all winter long. Didn't have to put out any hay. This picture of my daughter. Of course, she's 10 now, a little bit bigger, but this is, you know, roughly 4.5 to 5 foot triticale that we interseed with our old alfalfa stands to increase yield, but give us some diversity in those fields. And we do it year after year. Found this to be a very productive mix for our drylands, our dryland fields. We get a lot of tonnage and with very little rainfall. And then, of course, on the right side, you know, anytime you're in an area that's heavy with wildlife and the only thing you can see out of the top of your crop is a deer's antlers on a grass field is a good thing. Tells me that my cattle are going to have some good meals the coming winter. Another picture of a triticale field. This was last summer, and it was a field that we had taken through, you know, it was the first one that I really tried to implement these principles. So in the video that we did some cereal rice, some hairy veg, came out of that, went into it with some winter triticale and some winter peas, came out of that, and then went into it with some corn. And, you know, I'd never grown corn before, but I looked at this as an opportunity. This is late season grazing corn. So this wasn't even planted until the 10th of July. And of course, early August, you've got, you know, some really healthy, vibrant corn, no fertilizers needed, coming up with some really nice alfalfa. And so that alfalfa, of course, hopefully feeding some nitrogen to the corn. This stuff ended up growing, you know, 9.5 to 12 foot tall by first frost. And it actually, the purpose was for pheasant cover. Problem was it's next to impossible for people to hunt pheasants in 10-foot tall crop. It's just really difficult and dangerous. So we ended up cutting rows in it and using that and then pulling those rows out for feed for our cattle. You know, and then what do you do after? Well, corn was really good because it helped clean up some weeds. And so this year, of course, we're going into it with wheat, 20 acres of wheat, and then 30 acres of peas. And so now we're growing the feed that we need for our other animals through the winter. So we're making our own pheasant feed. We're making hog feed for my daughter's show pig business. And then, of course, selling to the friends and neighbors. And then chicken feed. It's a very common, you know, not everybody, a lot of people around us have the requisite, you know, 10 to 12 chickens, and they're going to the local supply, or not necessarily local, but, you know, Murdoch's or Menards or wherever it is to buy their processed chicken feed. And so we thought, well, why not try to add some value to these crops that we did anyway to feed our pheasants and start feeding them or selling that product to the community. So we're really excited to be able to offer some laying hen formulas and some bird grower mixes that we'll be supplying this year. The other thing is just about roots. So these are a pea that we found 2 years ago and compared to a pea this year. And the nodules, you know, for me was really exciting because I didn't understand them when I, you know, fully how they worked. And if anybody's ever, you know, opened up a pea nodule or a nodule in any good legume and broken those out, it's almost like blood color, and you can tell how healthy they are just by the deep red or dark orange of these nodules. And they're providing nitrogen in your soil just like your biology is, or cycling that nitrogen. And the diversity of the crops, you know, that we plant, Delvin was talking about having legumes and everything that he does, nitrogen fixing plants specifically. You know, it's key to the success of regenerative agriculture. You know, we cannot grow monocrops and be regenerative. It's just, well, we can, but it's incredibly difficult and super expensive. Let the plants, let nature do that work for you. more pictures of roots. These are some cereal rye from a couple of years ago where, you know, these pictures are the difference between biology and non-biological soils. So, you know, of course, heavy root mass plants on the left were the first time that I had applied extracts to seed that I put in the ground. And of course, the plants on the right are the plants that plant in the same field, and it's the cereal rye that we did not put biology on. And what we found in certain areas of our farm that we were very degraded soils as far as activity, right? We had things growing, but they weren't growing very well. And there was an understanding with, you know, the first compost that we applied where we saw definite benefits. And so the last 3 years have been, well, how are we doing this? What is the science saying? How are we changing overall? And so I participated in a really interesting study this year with the scientist Jelva Leckberg, and kind of looking at, you know, PLFA and NFLA test, the nanolipid fatty acid test, but now also DNA sequencing. So we would make extracts, we would coat our seeds, we would plant them in furrow, whatever it was, and then analyze, you know, of the biology that we put on that seed and then put in the ground. What happened to it? You know, is that biology still there? Is the same stuff that we're inoculating with showing up in our plants? And, you know, we're still waiting on the data from the sequencing. What we're seeing is that, yeah, there is some of that that's happening, and it is effective. But we found to be more effective is the amount of carbon that we're able to store. We need food sources. We need things for this biology to eat. And for me, that was the hardest part, because the money that we generated came from cutting and baling that hay. And to be able to change our practices with pheasant hunting and other things and feeding cattle to actually keeping that carbon on our soil and then getting it back incorporated has really been key to our success. So, you know, down the road, I don't know if I see myself being a hay farmer any longer. I see the benefit that the animals have, and, you know, the direction that we're trying to take this place. We see more positive change coming from eliminating the take, or continuing to take mentality. These Haney tests, you know, show a succession of good things that have happened. So in 21, you know, look at soil organic matter. I think it's a really good judge of benefits of what we're doing. 6%, 6.4 in 22, 6.9 in 23. And new testing that came out, you know, fall of 23. We're continuing that trend. Our pH is dropping. That means our biology is more active. We're getting more fungal. Our electrical conductivity is increasing as well. But these PLFA tests are what's super fascinating. 21 to 22, we saw protozoa show up, and I don't know if that was a fluke. It was something that I was extremely excited about. But the other thing is that our fungal bacteria is changing and changing pretty rapidly. The expectation is that we can do this quicker. And what I found is it just changes in testing with this new project that I'm working on with Jelva, is that we've had some major significant changes. And so I'm going to show you this next slide are the results of that. So on the left are listings of fields that we have. And I think it's always important to compare to what we would call our native soil. We have our bacterial biomass, our fungal biomass, our ratios, and then our organic matter. And so this 50 is a field that we've tested pretty regularly. The native, of course, is in between. And then these PVL, this is a pivot. And the control samples are where we were doing non-biological, and then where we were doing biological inoculations. And what we found is our soil organic matter across our range. So the soil organic matter we had in that CMA 50 area was, you know, 4 or 5%. And when I started, and that stuff's up almost 2.5. On our pivot, which we know is good, you know, we're 7.8, 7.9, 7.7. And that's an area that we've continued to have, but what we're seeing is our fungal to bacterial, pretty promising numbers. We are becoming, fungally dominated. And that was my goal when we started. If we eliminate tillage, what happens? And what we're seeing is that is changing. We are also seeing production increases. We're seeing water holding capacity increases. And why is that happening? And so that's the next big focus of mine, is trying to understand really how all of this stuff works together, because it's not a roadmap. It's a lot of observation. If we change one thing, I was actually talking today before we got on the webinar about a problem we're having with white grubs. When you don't use chemicals and you don't use anything, you have to have natural predators, because things will show up. And we had some white grubs show up and did some really interesting things over the last 10 days to try to get birds on our place to eat these white grubs. And so, I encourage you all to keep an open mind, look at the data, analyze it, observe, and then make change if change is necessary. The other thing too, this is one of my favorite pictures of the 3 different soil types that we have on our ranch. On the left-hand side, this is a less than 2% organic matter. In the middle, this is 4.5, 5, I believe. And then on the right is a place that I found that's over 10%. And you can just see in that jar on the right how big and chunky and aggregated that soil is. And that happens when you have a lot of active biology. These are me holding those same soils in my hand. And, the one thing you notice on the left is roots. On the right, you don't see a lot of roots. Things crumble, they fall off, and the important part doesn't make the journey. I hope that, I've continued my journey with you guys, and I hope that we continue to do things that are exciting for kind of the mid-size in agriculture, trying to perfect these small principles that we can do on a large scale and continue to scale them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cory. That's so great to hear an update of what's been going on with you and how you're changing your business. I wanted to remind everybody, as Cory's got up here, if you have questions for the panelists, please put them in the Q&A section. And we're going to turn to John now. And there's going to be a little bit of a film that he's going to be speaking over. So don't be alarmed that the film doesn't have sound. That's because the sound will be John. So go ahead and move on to that.
Hopefully I'm not muted.
You're not. You're good to go. I'm going to hit play, John.
Okay. So I am deeply grateful to be here, and I used to be young. This is when I went off to China, and I was 26 years old. I was pretty busy for a long time doing news. So I've been a professional observer for basically my entire adult life. And I covered primarily politics and economics and culture, geopolitics, big kind of stories. But it was in about 1994 that I was asked by the World Bank to go and film a baseline study in the upper and middle reaches of the Yellow River in what's called China's Lush Plateau. And it's the cradle of Chinese civilization. So it's a pretty important place. And there, my life was totally changed by this, because when I compared what I was seeing in the cradle of Chinese civilization, I compared it to the type of things I was seeing in the geopolitical stories that I had been covering. And I decided that actually ecology was just more important, and it existed on a different scale. I started to realize that I'm looking at billions of years of transformations, and that over time the earth had totally transformed, and it all began with microbes. these are actually filamentous fungi, which are taken with a electron microscope. So you can actually see that the structure of the soil is held together by a type of glue. The sheath is a polycarbonate, and it's a polysaccharide, I'm sorry. And it covers this and holds the soil in place. So, and it's very powerful, it's very strong. And this is also the mechanism for making mineral nutrients bioavailable to plant life. And so from the early beginnings, I realized I was looking at time. I was seeing through time. There was cosmic time, earth time, evolutionary time, human history, and now and then the future. And I realized that when humans emerged, the basic ecological functionality of the earth was already intact, that we had a fully functional atmosphere, a hydrological cycle, the soil was fertile, and we had amazing biodiversity, and that these systems had co-evolved to alter and create these systems. It's miraculous, basically. So it's evolutionary, but it's a miracle. So I kind of noticed that if God time equals 4.567 billion years, and 7 days of God time is 4.7 billion years, there's no difference between creation and evolution. But then when I started to look at history, I realized that human beings, when they emerged as the apex kind of species, they didn't really understand this at all. And they were really altering the systems that they found. And what we see in China, of course, it's somewhat specific to China, but it's not
Are you
really
talking to me?
specific to China. It's
Oh, yeah.
somebody's not muted. I don't know who that is. But when I looked at this, I realized that over historical time, human beings had really massively degraded the evolutionary systems because they didn't understand. It was basically from ignorance, and also from the concept that human beings are more important than other species, and not knowing how the symbiotic relationships of all life was organizing to alter the physics on the planet. And I started to realize how many subjects I was starting to look at. I was observing atmospheric science and hydrology and geology and chemistry and microbiology, and then I got to this concept of physics, that the physics is different. And I started to see that the moisture levels are connected to this solar radiation, and the solar radiation is moderated by the height of the canopy and the microclimate below the canopy. And so the complexity, the degree of complexity, then vortex activity, when you start to understand temperature differentials and vortex activity and the wind direction, wind speeds, then you realize like everything is connected. None of this is a singularity. It's all connected. And so there's either function or dysfunction. And so I realized I was only seeing functional systems or dysfunctional systems. And then as this project that I had been so fascinated with continued, it went on for about 10 years, and it was over 35,000 square kilometers. So that's approximately the size of Belgium or Maryland, so it's a huge area. And the idea that you could change the entire area. And then I realized, okay, in most cases, we're talking about productivity. We're thinking we need to have more production. But actually, what they were doing is they were removing land from production and giving it back to nature. And remarkably, that increased the productivity. And so what this said to me was that the function is the primary system and the production is a secondary system. It's a derivative. And starting to understand this, I realized, oh, we've made so many mistakes because we're saying that our economy is coming from what we produce and what we buy and sell. But actually, the real value is in the functional ecosystems. And then what I saw was that it was possible to transform these systems. The earlier picture was 1994, and this is 2009. So that's 15 years of transformation. And now this is the 30th year. This year is the 30th year. I'm going back to film again. And it's just astonishing that if we can, this was called the most eroded place on earth. It was devastating. There was drought, there was flooding, there was famine, there was poverty. It was incredible. And it is transformed in just 10 or 15 years when you can bring back perennial stream flows, you can bring back soil fertility, you can bring back biodiversity. And weirdly, they were planting mainly monocultures, but they didn't end up with monocultures. They ended up with polycultures. And this made me kind of think, are perennial polycultures? Certainly they're like a later succession of evolution. When we return every year to annual monocultures, we're actually doing something that might not have been done for hundreds of millions of years. We're exposing the surface of the earth to direct solar radiation. And this is where we're altering the physics and where we're altering the temperature and where we're causing thermic drafts to put moisture into the upper atmosphere and all of these things. And so it became clear to me that it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale degraded landscapes. And this is what humanity as a species, planetary scale, must understand and must do. And I started to see that I was only seeing this function or degree of functionality or another trend, which was dysfunctional or a degree of dysfunction. And when I realized that these were just opposite directions, I mean, you're going in different directions, and that if you started to understand what is a functional ecosystem, then you could change it. And this graph, I started to think about when the Chinese began to degrade the landscape. It was pristine. It was beautiful. It was probably the most valuable land because it created the largest, ethnic group on the planet. But they were degrading it and headed toward ecological collapse. But then they made an intervention. And I think this intervention is the paradigm shift that determines whether humanity can survive if we just understand this, understand that the ecological function is more valuable than the production. And we understand also something that John Nash had learned, that if we work for the good of all, I mean, at some point, his thing is that if we work in our own benefit, it goes to the point we degrade the collective. If we work in our own behalf and we degrade in the collective, it's not in our interest. It's not in our own interest anymore. So we're there at this point because we're seeing multiple crises it's not just that we're seeing really serious climate changes or food insecurity or extreme weather events. We have all of these at the same time, and we have active war. So all of these things are coming together. And in the past, when all these kinds of things have happened, basically civilizations collapsed. And so it sort of looks like, from an observational point of view, as someone who's spent their entire life looking at politics, economics, culture, and ecology, I would say we're in a very dangerous period. But also, I've seen that in terms of what the Chinese call wei ji, it means crisis, but it means danger and opportunity, because that's the moment when you can have real change. And we've seen that organic material, all of this understanding from permaculture is exactly true. We can increase organic matter. It will change the biodiversity. It will change the accumulation of necromass. So it's not simply biomass, it's also necromass as it dies and it accumulates. And what I've seen in extreme areas is that it's not limited to just small things. We can go into terrible deserts. This is called the Taklamakan, and it means you go in, but you don't come out. And even there, the Chinese have put shelter belts through the middle of this. They've learned how to do this. We could apply this in North Africa, in the Middle East, or in other parts of North America or Central America, South America, Central Asia. And basically, what this does is it changes the surface temperatures. It changes relative humidity. It changes wind speed, wind direction, and vortex activity. And when we get to this realization that, and I hope you know about the ecosystem restoration communities, because there are now 70 of these around the world. And basically, it's people who choose to do this kind of work. It creates communities where they work together for the good of all. And as they do this, they're creating huge value. And that value may not necessarily be noticed or understood right now, but in the future, it's going to be understood, because it can solve all of the questions that we're asking about, that we're faced with in this meta crisis or poly crisis or whatever you want to call it. So it also psychologically is so much better for the communities to be doing something that they know is good for themselves, good for the earth, good for future generations. And this understanding becomes that what we're doing is going to determine the quality of life for all life in the future. And we can learn from the mistakes in the past, and we can transform human civilization. We have to transform human civilization at this time. And it's just a better way of life. It's a lifestyle choice. And we have some really big questions that we need to collectively contemplate. Humanity must act as a species on a planetary scale. It's not simply that we're trying to make food production. If we understand that food production actually is 50% of the industrial agriculture is wasted, we don't need that. We need perennial polycultures that are ecologically functional, and we need to eat more healthy, diverse, nutrient-dense food. And so all of this information is coming out of this work, and it's working around the world where it's being applied. And this is what we need to do. And it's the basis of value. So ultimately, it can change our economy. And our economy and all human effort can go toward functional ecosystems. Thanks for listening. I'm happy to be here with all of you.
Wow, that was really, really inspiring. Thank you, John. Uh, almost hate to go to the next slide after that. Do want to talk about what we do here as a school. We're in the business of trying to educate people to go out and do this work. We offer a number of different courses, and it's not something that you'll find that's taught really. I mean, some universities are beginning to teach some of this information. Our staff is extremely talented and passionate, and they want to see you succeed. So we're going to show you a little short video, and then we're going to go into a Q&A session. So please bear with us here. Let me make sure I do this correctly. It's just a short video.
Some of the farmers working with soil food web consultants around the world are seeing remarkable results.
Just within the first 3 years of working with these folks, they saved over $1 million just by cutting back on synthetic fertilizers, going from 200 units of nitrogen per acre down to 150 to even 50 units of nitrogen with the same, if not a better yield, which is really exciting.
If we look at the fertilizer savings across 1 hectare, we're looking at about $1,000 in savings. And then when we look at the increased revenue from the yield increases, we're looking at about $504. So the gross margin was increased by about $1,500. And then if you extrapolate this over 200 hectares, we're looking at about $300,000 over the course of any given year.
You can see the average again, 72%. And if you just take a few of those examples, you can take celery or you can take kale, you can see that we reach over 100% of yield increase.
Basically, the weight gain again was like 25% or more. The only complaint they got was the client wasn't used to obviously baling as often because the crop is growing so much better and so much healthier. They went from 280 to well over 400 sacks an acre. So that's 42% increase, which is really impressive. I mean, dollars and cents wise, that's a big jump. The PEs were really amazing. They were really aggressive with some of the PE projects. 136% increase, that's pretty impressive.
If you're interested in joining the soil revolution, now is a great time. We are making the Consultant Kickstarter bundle available through June 26th at the price of $39.50 to a limited number of students. With the Consultant Kickstarter bundle, you can register for the Soil Food Web Foundation courses with Dr. Elaine Ingham for just $39.50, saving over $1,000. You'll also get Stage 1 of the Consultant Training Program totally free, saving a further $2,000. That's 26 hours of mentor time dedicated to helping you make your own biological compost and develop your microscopy skills to the standard required to qualify as a certified Soil Food Web Lab technician. You'll also get 2 free bonuses with this offer: the Introduction to Permaculture by Graham Bell and the Soil Sponge Workshop with Dee Dee Pershouse, saving a further $599. The total value of this bundle is $7,599, for which you'll only pay $39.50, saving over $3,600. That's 48% off. Remember, there are limited places available, so please don't delay. Finance options are now available, so you can pay at your own pace with a firm. Kickstart your new career today with Dr. Elaine and her team.
Okay. I would say that the Stage 1 of the consultant training program is very awesome. It is taught by our very talented staff, and we've been experimenting with some different ways of delivering it. So you can choose between a few ways of doing it, and we're trying to work on building more community. We're going to start with some questions here, and I feel like, Delvin, this might be one aimed at you. So there seems to be a basic conflict between permacultural principles and the imperatives of the conventional economy. How do you deal with these conflicts?
Well, it's a really great question with no easy answer. I just want to say, wow, I'm still blown away by this presentation from Cory that really, I think, brought up some great answers to this question itself in relation to the local economy and looking at the needs and gaps in the local community and how to fulfill that, like with the example of the local chicken feed instead of the imported processed industrial chicken feed that most people are having to do. And I mean, man, am I ever blown away by Dr. John Liu's presentation. I mean, that is just incredible. And I think certainly an argument could be made, as he did, about looking at long-term economic gain by saving the environment, that it actually is in our best interest, not only economically, but evolutionary, you know, and our life really depends on it. I think that the permaculture, one of the many permaculture answers to this is to create a relocalized economy. And this can be done with community currencies. It can be done with time banks, with just looking at the needs of the local community that aren't being fulfilled locally and encouraging or supporting even other people to fulfill those needs. And really just understanding that, yeah, we vote with our money. Every dollar we spend is a vote, and looking at who are we personally voting for? Are we voting for ethical local goods and services, or are we voting for the industrial system? And so I'm a great believer that small changes, even in the context of our own lives, will add up and will model behaviors that'll enroll people around us. And it's the ripple effect that we're going for. So yeah, start small. And it looks like John will tag in here. I'll pass it over to you.
John.
Yeah, I would just say that I think it's you know, we need to do what's right. And we need the hydrology, we need the soil fertility, we need the biodiversity, and that is the basis of real wealth. And so those of us who are studying this and understanding this, we need to really create alternatives to the sort of the existing paradigm that is not working. So what we also see is that the highest impact is in the worst places. So if we can figure out how to go to the worst places and restore them to functionality, and the other thing that we see is that functional systems are more productive. So suddenly we can do restoration, which is hugely valuable in its own right, by reversing climate change and drought and wildfires and floods but it's also more productive. So getting everybody involved and to understand that this is what we need to do, I think that's what the ecosystem restoration communities are helping people to do, and together with the Soil Food Web School and all the other groups that are working on this, we have to collaborate. We're not in competition. We're in collaboration with each other.
Very much so. Cory, it looks like you'd like to weigh in.
Well, I think to reiterate what I said is, you know, to pay for these changes that we are attempting, right? We've got to be producing something, and we've got to monetize, you know, our land in a way that's beneficial to whatever our goals are. But we also have to think about the greater community as a whole, and where do they fit into it? You know, I mean, nobody on this webinar, I think, has been to my place, but we're surrounded by $1 million homes. Their view is onto our ranch. And it's, you know, for us to give them something so beautiful to look at, we think it's only fair that we're trading them a good or a service that benefits them as well. And, you know, one thing that I find so exciting about our beef operation specifically is our animals, the only traveling they do is the last day of their life to the processor. But in general terms, the animals that we raise on our ranch don't travel more than their quick trip to the processor, more than a half a mile of distance from where they were born their entire life, and depending on which direction they're going. And I think that's really important. If we can keep, as local, our footprint, at least as far as carbon is concerned, is so much smaller, and we're using these systems and able to monetize them, and then all of a sudden we become sustainable. And I think that's been my goal since day one, is how do we become sustainable to a point where drought's not going to affect us, economic changes aren't going to affect us, we have good markets, and we're here for the long term.
That's great. I've heard another farmer say, Cory, that their animals only have one bad day in their lives.
Yeah, that's very true. And we hope it's only one bad day. Everything else is a dream.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for your answer. Let's move on to the next question. How do you differentiate in biomass of fungi and bacteria? How were they separated?
I'll assume that question was probably for me. And my background, of course, is not in measuring. I leave it to the scientists that do this testing for us. But I will say it's based on biomass. So, of course, fungi is much bigger than bacteria, but they are scaled to be equivalent and then measured on their total biomass. And the information that I gave, that's how it was completed.
The school teaches a method too of calculating the biomass for each of these kinds of things, because we can't say we can't compare numbers, for instance. That wouldn't make sense, because there's vastly larger numbers of bacteria than there are fungi, but the fungi might have more biomass, which it would be great to see in some soils, right? If we had more fungal biomass, that's what we're aiming for.
Yeah.
Hopefully that answered your question, Anita. So let's go ahead and move on to the next question. John, I just saw the diamond-shaped sections made with pushed-in straw put in the field. Is this for restoring biograss?
Well, it's interesting to do that. That's called, well, it's just making grids by pushing straw into the ground. So it's essentially, when you have sand, it's all silicate and there's no organic material, and it really, the surface temperatures, the evaporation rate's very high. Now, what's interesting in those places where they were using this, that particular place was Inner Mongolia. And when they do that, they put the straw in, they don't add water, they don't do anything, but moisture, whatever rain there is, or whenever there's a dew point, that moisture will go down the straw and will begin to deteriorate. The bacteria then will start to deteriorate the straw, and then the wind will blow up seeds, or birds will come and land on it, and they will leave their droppings, and without having put any seeds there, it will start to grow. And so if we were to understand this and make ever smaller grids in grids, we could take care of huge amounts of places. And what I saw was any place that had exposed soils, this is just wrong. And even it's hard to imagine plowing and exposing the soil at some point, because maybe we shouldn't be doing that. When we did that long ago, 10 to 12,000 years ago, how many millions of years was it since that area was exposed to direct solar radiation? And where do we see direct solar radiation on the Earth in natural systems? We don't, except deserts. And most of those deserts were not necessarily naturally occurring deserts. They were desertified by human civilization. And where do we see the exposed soils? We see Mars or the moon or asteroids. And, so we have an oxygenated atmosphere because all of the all of life is respirating. And, to understand this is to get to another level. And that's the level that we need to be at in order to survive at this time. So it's really easy to use the straw, and it just by adding organic material, it will start to rot and it will change everything.
Okay, thank you, John. I see that we didn't completely answer Anita's question. Anita, when we're doing the microscopy that we teach at this school, we can determine or we identify by morphology bacteria versus fungi. And we have calculations that let us determine the biomass. When you're talking about the PFLA test that Cory is doing, it's something that I'm not an expert on, but it does have to do with fluorescing. Basically, I think I'm probably saying that wrong, but I think it's correct. And it's they also do that sort of measurement. We can have our staff follow up with you with a better answer on the PFLA. If one of our behind the scenes folks would make a note of that, I'd appreciate it. All right, for the next question, Delvin. Considering how polluted the ocean is, are you concerned the seaweed you collect contains heavy metals?
Yeah, there is pollution out in the world. There is concern about that, for sure. Here we have, have to trust that the soil and our composting methods are starting to help to process things. We can use mushrooms and bioremediators. I use a lot of phalaris grass, one of the Phalaris arundiacea, one of the bioremediating plants here. But sure, yeah, I'm concerned that the world is polluted, and I'm still going to use the materials around me and compost them down and add organic matter and work with what I can to try and take care of that. But yeah, there is testing. Here where I am in the little village on the coast of British Columbia, things aren't too bad, but I think it's a good question in general for people, and you really want to look at where the pulp mills are and where the industry is. So good question, and not as much a concern for me because of where I am, but I think a very relevant question for a lot of people.
Very good. Okay, Cory, how are you applying compost?
I think the better question is how we're not applying compost. I've tried every possible way that I could think of. So we have a machine called a Terrigator. It holds 24 yards, or I believe 18 yards at a time, that we're applying. We can put about 2,000, well, the 3,500 yards that we applied this year, we did in about 4 days. And so a big loader filling it, we stage piles around the ranch and then use that machine to spread. We make extracts and we put them all different kinds of places. So as a seed coat, we apply liquid in furrow at time of seeding through our drill that we have. We aerate, so one function on our sod field that's good for root development. Open up that soil, and then we're putting liquid extract down inside the holes that we're aerating. And then, of course, running it through our pivot or applying with sprayer. All of those, of course, being liquid and being extracted is how. And if there's any other ideas, I'd be interested in trying. But those are the things that I've come up with to get our compost out on our soil.
Definitely a challenge. Okay. What about communities like mine in California, which are surrounded by large-scale farms? What do we do with that as who we are against all of the time? That's a pretty open-ended question. Who would like to take a shot at that?
I'll say something real quick. I think in general, the human nature is that they want to find the good in things. And, one way to start, the way I started farming, was helping in a community garden. And this was years ago, back when I was 16, I think. Just volunteering time. And with that comes relationships. And with those relationships come opportunities. And so, next to you may be the big industrial agricultural organization. But I think the time it takes to understand where they're at, and maybe they do have some area on their farm that they aren't using, or maybe they do have some space that they would lease to you. A lot of our growth has come off of leasing land. Leasing land is, of course, much cheaper than owning land. And, it's really helped our ability to grow and meet some of the demand that we have from customers. When you're out talking to a landowner that you're going to apply, regenerative or organic or whatever way you choose to go, but those farming principles, landowners are open to hearing that, just as unexcited as we are about industrial agriculture. People that have land that maybe had a bad tenant in the past are in the same boat. And I think, building those relationships, asking questions, if you really want to be a farmer, I can assure you that there is someone out there that is looking for you to do something on their land. And, when I started this project, I did not expect that. But the neighbors, we always think of other farmers in the negative, that the neighbors always asking us what we're up to or looking over our fence. But I really think, and I'm a firm believer now, that when you're doing the right thing, they're looking for the right reason. And they talk to each other, landowners, good example this summer. We put up hay, we apply extract to a neighbor. Last summer, they of course told all their neighbors. So this summer we applied extract to all of their land. And so it turned into a revenue center that I really wasn't trying to explore. It's running out of time in the day. We can't get all of this stuff done. And, okay, now it's time to really refocus our resources. But what we're finding now is that we're growing organically with zero advertising, very little marketing, because people really believe in what we're doing. And I think that's key. So even though they may be your neighbor and you may be scared to talk to them, have that conversation, let them know you have an interest, and you'll find somebody that will accept you and accept your ideas. I promise you that.
As a retired farmer, I would say that's true. I have a farm sitting fallow at the moment with great fencing and all kinds of good stuff on it that I used to watch those films where they showed the young farmers coming in and getting the land. I realized that I was the old farmer, so I quit going to those films. But it's true. It's out there. There is land where people are interested in you coming in. John.
Yeah, I just think that one of the things that we're seeing in different parts of the world, so we have now 70 ecosystem restoration communities, and they're in all continents. But what we're seeing is that those communities that take on the social issues like childcare or care for the elderly or feeding the hungry, they kind of get more and more people coming to participate. And this makes them grow. And then when they start to realize, I don't just have to do restoration inside my fence line, but we could all go out and do restoration along the highways or along the railroads or in commons, in certain countries like India or Bangladesh or in Africa or Guatemala or all over the world. Basically, there's huge amounts of land, there's massive amounts of degraded landscapes, and they need to be restored. And the other thing I think is if you like feed the hungry by having food go directly from food forests to a community kitchen, and then basically you can have the homeless and the hungry participate in gardening and growing food forests, and you can have them also participate in cooking. And then if you have a stage next to this and you have really good bands playing there all the time, it's going to attract more and more people. You can have movie night, you can have all kinds of things. So, and maybe we can get people to stop looking at their phones and TV and go out and really watch good movies or watch theater or participate in theater or have music performances. This is really where the community comes together, and then we have a collective understanding and a collective intention, and then we really get to choose what's happening. We don't have to accept what's unacceptable.
Thank you, John. Well, we're gonna wrap it up here. So I wanted to ask if the panelists would like to, any of them would like to give any final statements. We certainly appreciate you guys spending your time with us and talking to everyone here. Delvin, you had your hand up.
Great. I wanted to say thank you, Kim. You did such a great job, and what an honor to be with Cory and Dr. John Liu. And I thought, as you found from my presentation, I do love my quotes. I thought I'd close with a quote from Toby Hemingway. He said, "The future of permaculture is not to be called permaculture anymore, just to be called the way we do things." Thanks, everybody.
I'll
Well
go
done.
next. Thank you again to the Soil Food Web School for having me, for introducing me a few years ago to, life under the soil, and, really giving me a good foundation on where to take my goals as an individual farmer, but collectively. And so again, as always, Sammy and everybody at the Soil Food Web School, thanks for having me, and I hope that I help someone learn something today.
Well, thank you everybody for listening and for having me here, and for what you do, because you guys are the real heroes, and it's exciting and interesting. And as a 72-year-old, I'm really glad that anybody listens to me at all. It's easier to get me to start than to get me to stop. So thank you so much, and hope to see you again soon.
We really appreciate having you here, John and Cory and Delvin. We look forward to seeing you again in the future. We appreciate all of the collaboration that we will be doing in the future. Please don't forget, this lecture webinar series does continue next week. So please tune in again. And we appreciate you joining us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kim, for your great hosting.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Kim.
Don't forget to click that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell to stay updated with all our new videos.